Hello all and welcome back to Marnie Makes Games. This is going to be video number 3 in my beginner series on how to create a Pong-ish game. So, let's get to it. My name is Marnie and I make games. Now before we start, I want to ask you a favor. If you found the series useful so far and you've learned something, let me know in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button so that you know when the next video is coming out. Right, let's get going with this. In this session, we want to be able to get our player moving, and we also want to get the ball to start moving in a direction that actually makes sense for this type of game. So let's start off with the ball. We're going to go to our ball script, which is attached to our ball over here. Go back to editing the ball script. And I think we should change our direction a little bit. Now, to make it easier to play around with, we're just going to serialize that field. No, let's not do that. Let's jump in at the deep end and immediately make it random. Okay, so we're going to change this. And then we'll go into start. And we'll say direction equals new vector 2. Now I want it to go sideways at a good clip, so we'll do one for sideways, but for the up and down I want it to go a little bit up or a little bit down with a different amount each time. So let's do a random number there. So we'll go random. Okay, now we've got 2 here. If you look at my choices, we've got Unity Engine Random and System.Random. We're going to use Unity Engine.Random. So just go down there and say enter. If it's complaining over here, you can put your cursor on that word, you go Alt and enter. And it actually gives you some options to fix what's wrong, none of which appear here today, which is lovely. Basically, we wanted to use Unity Engine's random. Okay, let's keep going. We'll go up here. So we'll go using Unity Engine dot random. Again, I'm letting you see me struggle so that you know everybody does. Okay, I've typed random again. It says Unity Engine dot random. So I'm just going to type that in. And why are we complaining? Random dot range over here. There we go. We can take this off at the top. And we'll say the minimum component for our y would be minus 0.3, and our maximum exclusive will be minus 0.3. Now, oh, my mistake, 0.3. So what does this mean? It means that it's going to pick a number between minus 3. It could be minus 3 because the minimum is inclusive, and plus 0.3, which would be exclusive. So it'll go right up to 0.29999, however far you want to go, but never actually hit 0.3. That's important if you're using random.range, because a lot of times with Unity, you'll use it in applications where you count from 0 and not 1, and then it's good to just stop before you actually get to the number at the top. Makes no sense now, but you'll understand it later on. Okay, so we've got random.range. You can see here it's complaining because I just put 0.3. That means that it doesn't know which data type it is, so we just put an F there to tell it that this is going to be for a float. And you'll also notice that we missed a little bracket there. You always need to close your brackets. On the subject of ints and floats, you can look up data types, but I'll give you the quick version here. A string would be basically like a word or a sentence. In other words, it's a bunch of characters together. An int would be a whole number. It can be positive or negative. And a float would be a number that has commas in it, like 5.2 or 0.3. There's also doubles, which we won't talk about right now. And there's the chars, which is basically just like a one character. And that's about it. But I would strongly suggest that you actually go through and look at data types, just so you know what's going on. Okay, so I've changed this. You can see it's actually stopped complaining because I already have Unity Engine there. So it's just random.range. Now, if I didn't have Unity Engine up there, it might have complained there, and then we could have used Alt-Enter, and it would have given us the option to fully qualify it as Unity Engine.random.range, or just to automatically add the using statement on top. Okay, so now we've got our vector, which is going to tell us which way to launch the ball. As far as going to the right, it's going to go full on to the right, and then it's only going to go about somewhere between minus 1/3 as much to the bottom or 1/3 as much to the top. This can be anything. It can even be 0, which means it'll be a straight shot to the right. Now, when we get to the editor, you're going to notice that if we do this, our ball's still going to start curving down. If you've been following along, you can probably guess why. Come on. There we go. All right, have you guessed it? If you haven't, I'm going to tell you. We currently have our rigid body affected by gravity. In other words, even though we're shooting the ball off to the right, eventually it's going to get pulled down by gravity. Now let's remove our gravity scale here. We don't want to just go and make the mass 0, because the mass also affects the momentum. So rather make your gravity scale 0. That means our ball's not affected by gravity. And let's see how it behaves. and it's doing absolutely nothing. Do we know why? Let's have a look. Okay, this is why. As you can see, I'm coming in, I'm adding a force using my direction multiplied by the force magnitude, but I haven't actually defined my direction yet, which means right now this is just a 0 or a null. So I need to go here and define my direction before I actually add the force. Otherwise there's just going to be no direction to the force, and the force will effectively be 0. If you spotted that, good on you. If not, don't worry. Okay, let's play and see what happens. There we go. Now you can see it keeps going in the same direction. That's because when we respawned it, we basically kept the speed and direction of the rigid body. We didn't freeze the rigid body and relaunch the ball. We'll fix that. So let's go in here. So let's make a new function, and we'll call it launch ball. It's a private function, so we're not going to add the public keyword, and we'll go launch ball. Whoops. Unity just auto-completed there for us, or should I say Visual Studio auto-completed something that we didn't really want. Okay, so on launch ball, we're basically going to determine the direction we want to launch and the magnitude of the force, just like we did in start. So we can launch ball from there. But now, if our ball's already moving, that means we need to fix something. We need to stop it. So we'll go rigid body dot velocity equals vector 2.0. So in other words, we're taking the velocity or the speed that the rigid body is moving, and we're changing that to 0, which should stop our ball in its tracks, and then we can basically launch it again. Let's see if that works. Okay, I'm not sure if that actually stopped my ball or not. All right, let's try something else. Why didn't it work? Well, we launched our ball on start, and on trigger enter we actually brought the ball back, but we didn't call launch ball again. So that wouldn't stop the velocity and also wouldn't relaunch the ball. So let's call launch ball and see if it works this time. There we go. So now we have a different direction each time. All right. Okay, we're about halfway through and our player is still not moving at all. So let's fix that. Firstly, let's put our player where it makes a little bit more sense. Turn the player here. We're going to go to that transform and just switch it back. So what we want to do is be able to move our player up and down. And we want to be able to use stuff like the game controller or a joystick or your keyboard, not just one thing. Later on, when we want to do multiplayer, we want to be able to have more than one input method. So we're going to use Unity's new input system, which is almost Unity's old input system by now. To add it, we'll go to Window, and then we'll go up to Package Manager. We'll make sure that we are on Unity Registry. Excuse me. There we go. Up here, we'll make sure we're on Unity Registry. And then we'll type Input System. We'll install that. I'm going to pause here to save a little bit of your time and come back when it's actually ready to go. Okay, so now the new input systems install has been running, and you start to see a message where it says that this project is using the new input system package, but the native platform backend for the new input system is not enabled, which means basically we need to restart. So we're going to say yes and restart our editor, and we'll be back when that's done. And we're back in Unity. That took long enough to go make a cup of coffee. So please don't think that everything just happens in a snap. Again, I'm doing this and I'm showing you guys warts and all, when I struggle, when I get things wrong, because I want you to know that everybody struggles. It's not that the guys on YouTube or those guys, some of them are good, but we're all human, and you know you're gonna get stuck sometimes, so just stick with it. Don't think you're not good enough. Everybody can do this. Just keep going. All right, now I need to keep going, so let's keep going. We've got our player, we've got our ball, the ball shoots. We need to get our player to intercept the ball, and we need a way to control the player. So we've installed Unity's input system. Now I'm going to go in my assets right here. Whoops. There we go. Project assets. I'm going to right click and I'll say create. I'll probably have to go all the way down to input actions. And we'll call this player input. Okay, so how does Unity's new input system works? Well, basically you can define a control scheme or an action map. let's do an action map here. We'll just call it player. I'm not going to go into this in depth, but if you really want to go deep into the Unity input system, go look at somebody called Sam Yam. She's got a channel where she did a whole series about the input system, and I'll try to link it for you in the description. Now, after I've created my action map, I'm going to create actions. So you can think of actions like jump, right, left, shoot, instead of thinking of keys. So in other words, I would define an action for jump, and then under that I would actually bind things to it to tell it when to jump. So I could define an action jump, and I'd call that in my script. And then over here I can say you can jump when this key is pressed on a controller, or this key is pressed on the keyboard, or this key is pressed on my joystick, or if my mouse is clicked. So that gives you a lot of flexibility, because then you can have many different ways of making the player do something, do an action. All right, let's see this in action. Excuse the pun. First, I'm going to rename this, and we are just going to call this one up. And now I click here on up, and what type of action do I want this to be? Now you can get different types of actions. Some actions will be like a button, so if you push it in, it's going to pick up when it's pushed down, it's going to tell you when it's released, and it's going to tell you when it's being held down. In our case, we want a value, and the control type for our action type is going to be a vector2. In other words, we're going to get a direction. Okay. Now we can click under here to add a new binding. You can just go plus if you haven't already. And then on your binding, you can go path. And you can go keyboard. Let's do this a different way. Strangely enough, I don't have a keyboard here. All right. Let's start with my gamepad. And I can say, oh my goodness, why am I stuck today? Give me a moment to get back to this. Let's take this away. And say action. Call it move, because I know what I did wrong. Let's say move. We'll go value vector2 over here, and now we can go add binding, and we can say up, down, left, right composite. So now this has a move for up, down, left, and right. Now we are not going to use our left and right, but we are going to use our up and down. And we can click here. Let's go back. If you press back, it actually starts to listen. And if I press up there, it goes keyboard up arrow. And I just click on it to confirm. Now, just for giggles, let's set left to the same direction. I can go here, press back, and if I press the left arrow on my keyboard, my player's also going, come here. Click on that, you go left, and the player is also going to left. Now let's do the same thing for down and right. So we've got right. I want that to be down. Click listen. And right. There we go. And I also want down to be down. Listen, press the down key and click on it. Now obviously for most games you would just basically go and have left, right, up and down be the 4 different directions for the keys. This is just me messing around with it a little bit. Okay. Now we can go back to move. We can do another path. So I'm going to say here, go there. And now it's listening. I grab my gamepad. I move the left stick. It detects it and you can go left stick. And just for giggles, let's go back up to move. We'll click here. We'll go add binding. We'll go path. Can't use the mouse button like that. Okay, never mind. I thought maybe we could just use our mouse wheel for this as well. There would be a way for it, but let's not get too lost in the weeds with that right now. I'm going to switch on autosave here so that it will save automatically and I don't have to tell it to. And that's basically it. Our actions are set up. So just to recap, you can create your action map, which I've called player. And then I created an action called move. And then I basically just added bindings to it. If you want to do a keyboard left, right, up, down, you can use this one. Add that up, down, that one. And then if you just want to do a normal binding, like I did with my gamepad, you can just go add binding and you can click on path here and you can actually go back and you can choose it from there. You see, now it gives me the mouse. And I can actually use my mouse scroll. There we go. We'll see how that works out later. So yeah, this is pretty easy. Play around with it. It really pays dividends if you do. Let's delete the binding we don't need. Over there. And we've got this saved. Now, how do we get the paddle to actually use this? So we're clicking on our player. And we go add component. And we are looking for the player input. I'll link the documentation for the Unity input system for you as well, so you can have a look around. Take the player input. Okay, now if we look at this player input component, it's asking for our actions map or our actions asset. That's what I created over here, so we'll drag that in. You could have also found it by clicking here and grabbing it from the list. Then we go down here. We're not going to worry about that right now. And we'll go to how behaviors are handled. So basically, when the action happens, how is it going to tell my scripts what's going on? Now you get messages like with the Unity update message and the start and so on. And you get Unity events and C# events. Now the easiest for me to use here is Unity events. So I'll choose that, choose Unity events. And now if you look down here, you'll get an event for each action. Now look carefully. There's device lost actions and device regained and device changed. we're not going to worry about that right now, but that just tells us when a new device is plugged in or unplugged. And here's the move action that we created. Now, the type of function that it's looking for has to take a parameter called a callback context, which you'll see in action now. So what we do is we go to our player, which doesn't have a script yet. So let's create a script. Go to scripts, right click, create, C# script, and we'll call this player. And I'm going to double click that to open it up. Okay, now I'm going to say here public needs to be public to be called from a different component. Public void. Void means that this script or this function doesn't give back any data. If you were to have something like a bool, which is a boolean, your function would actually be returning a value. I'm not going to go into that right now. And if you had an int, same thing, you'd be returning an int. And we're going to call this on move. I like when I have events to use on in the name. That just tells me that it's an event. And of course, I'm going to have a parameter in here. Now, a parameter is information you're passing to your function. If you didn't know that, we'll call this call back context, and the name of the variable we'll access is called context. So callback context is the type of variable, and context is how we're actually going to refer to it. Like me, I'm a type human, and the name you can call me is Moni. So we've got that, and you can see we've got a complaint here. That's because Unity doesn't know, or should we say Visual Studio doesn't know what this is. That's because we haven't declared it up here. So we can just go Alt Enter, and you can see here that it suggests that we say using Unity input system. We'll take that suggestion. So now that it knows to look for the Unity input system input actions callback context. All right, that's very, very complicated for very little. Now we want to know what the input is, and we want a place to store that input. So we're going to say vector2, because that's the type of input we're getting. You remember when we set up our actions, and we'll say current input. Now what happens is, let's just initialize this to be safe, equals vector2.0. This isn't strictly necessary, but I like to play it safe. Now, when onMove gets called, in other words, if Unity detects a movement on your controller or a key press on your keyboard, then it's going to call this if the correct key is pressed. So if I press the right hand key, I'm going to get a call to this move, or the left key or the left stick on my gamepad. So what happens now? Well, now we can say current input equals, we get the context, That's the information that's getting passed back to us. And we get the action that was performed. And we say read value. And we have to tell it what type of value we're expecting, which is a vector 2. Now it's going to give us a vector 2, which basically means we're going to get a value for the up and the left or the right values for the input. So in other words, let's say if the gamepad's joystick or the left stick was pressed all the way up, we'd get something like 0x and a 1y. If it's pressed 45 degrees to the right, we'll get a 0.5 and a 0.5, or something close to that. I think you get the picture. Now we've got that value. We are only interested in the x value of that. So in other words, we're only interested in left and right. And we'll use it up here because right now our input's not really doing anything for us. We just know what it is. So how are we going to move our player? Well, let's see. We'll go transform. Now lowercase transform is basically the transform property of this game object. Transform.position equals, we want to add to it, so let's say plus equals current input. Okay. Now, why are we getting a problem here? If you hover your mouse, it's going to tell you that you can't use the plus equals operator on a vector 2 and a vector 3 mixed. That's because our vector 2 has no z value, so it's complaining about it. Alright, but we want to get a vector 2 from our input, so what we're going to do here is something called a cast. So we're basically going to tell Unity to take our vector 2, which is our current input, and change it into a vector 3, like that. So now it's basically just a vector 3 with a 0 for a z. Okay, now, as it is right now, it's going to probably give us the y and the x values. So in other words, the button you pressed up and the button you pressed to the right. But because we set up our actions to not have a y width, shouldn't be a problem. Let's have a look. I'll save this. Okay, let's run. Okay, I'm pressing the left key. Oops, let's focus on the game screen. And absolutely nothing is happening. So what did we do wrong? I know what we did wrong. Go to player. Go player input, go to the events and actually hook it up. So under player here, we'll go plus. Now, which game object do we want this message to go to? We want it to go to our player. So you can drag the player from here, or you could have just grabbed it up here. And then we go function. We're looking for the player input script on our player. And we're looking for on move. No, my bad. We are actually looking for the player script, which is not attached. So grab this. Again, you're seeing this warts and all, so that you know this happens to everybody. So now we have the player object. There's our player script. We grab that and we say on move. So now what happens is, if we get an input, it should go to the on move, call our on move event, which in our script will change this value. And in each frame update, this value will be used to determine the new position of our game object or our player. So if the current input is 0, that means it's going to add nothing to it. If it's anything other than 0, then it will move in the direction specified. So let's have a look and see if it works this time. Okay. Whoa! It works and it's super fast. So that's pressing right, pressing left, pressing up, pressing down, and that works. Okay, we've gone long on this session, so I'm going to say goodbye and get back to you next time. Until we see each other again.